And storytelling can really mobilize all the parts of the brain that helps you to figure out who you are and really make something stick for you. And so that is why storytelling in all the ways is engaging for middle school students and why it became something so important for me to use in my classroom.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech Podcast button at the top of the page. This episode is sponsored by my Easy EdTech Club, a membership designed to help K-12 educators save time and simplify technology integration. When you join, you'll get instant access to dozens of months' worth of content from the past couple of years, plus new masterclasses, guides, and resources each month. It's all self-paced, so you can dive in whenever it works for your schedule. Head to easyedtechclub.com to learn more and sign up. That's easyedtechclub.com for all the details. This week's episode is titled Creative Ways to Amplify Student Voice in the Classroom with Jennifer Ciok. And it was so much fun chatting with Jennifer today. She shared lots of gems from her new book, The Meaningful Middle School Classroom: How to Spark Engagement That Fosters Deep Learning. It's always lots of fun to have a fellow ASCD author on the podcast, and Jennifer shared tips for educators that are working with lots of grade levels, not just middle school. We talk about elementary and high school strategies too. Let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you today about all things student voice and storytelling and getting kids to share their learning. But before we get into all of that, can you share a bit with listeners? What is your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Monica. I really look forward to this conversation. I've been listening to your work over the last couple of days, and I'm excited to have this conversation. So I am the manager of coaching and improvement for the University of Chicago's 2 and through middle grades network, but I started my career as a middle school social studies teacher. I was in the classroom for 15 years teaching social studies and English. Then I left the classroom in 2015 and became a social emotional learning manager at the high school level, working really on culture and climate, thinking through structures to support students and their post-secondary success. And then I came back to the middle grades and the place that I'm really passionate about. And really my role right now, every day is different, but most of my time is really dedicated to meeting with and coaching educators across Chicago public schools to really support continuous improvement efforts related to improving learning conditions in classrooms so that all middle school students can thrive.
And just that experience, particularly with those age groups, I think is such an important part of what we're looking at today, right? Your new book is called The Meaningful Middle School Classroom. And for educators who are working with middle school students or who are supporting students in elementary or maybe in high school, I think there's so much to learn from those experiences you've had with that group of students. So bringing it back to storytelling and student voice, what first sparked your interest in multimedia storytelling tools for students?
Yeah, so I think something that you just said is really important, right? There's like all these transition points for students where they're really trying to figure out, who am I? Who am I in this community? Who am I in this world? And that changes over time, and that story changes for you over time. It changes for me over time, and it definitely changes for students over time. And storytelling can really mobilize all the parts of the brain that helps you to figure out who you are and really make something stick for you. And so that is why storytelling in all the ways is engaging for middle school students, and why it became something so important for me to use in my classroom. So one of the projects that we do every year was this family history project, where students would share stories of a major event that their family lived through, or the story of their family's immigration, as many of my students were first and second generation in the United States. And after a few years of doing those projects and just having them share them with just their classmates, I really wanted them to be able to share them with a larger school community. And so that's where this idea of multimedia storytelling came from, and really allowing them to give literal voice and choice in how to share that story in so many different ways. So some students created children's books, others made podcasts, others made movies, others did digital scrapbooks, and each of them was narrated with their own voice. And what became really incredible was to be able to hear those stories in the classroom, yes, but also to be able to share them with our entire school community in a variety of different ways. They were shared with the elementary schools sometimes and allowed younger kids to hear them, right? Sometimes they were shared with parents, with like other community members within that. Those usually stayed kind of in the internal world. We'll talk a little bit later in some of the other parts of this about where like we expanded out.
Yeah.
But it really was a cool way to understand who was in the classroom, who was in front of you, and then understand a little bit about their family's past.
I love that flexibility, right? That kids have options for how to share their story, that they're creating something that's now very shareable. So when we talk about this idea of elevating student voice, right? Our education spaces, there can sometimes be like a buzzword or a word that people say, but they don't really embrace, right, all the things about it. So like when we talk about elevating student voice, what does that phrase mean to you?
Well, I think it starts with this idea of nothing about us without us, right? You hear that a lot in kind of the student voice world of like, this is that call to action that really you shouldn't be making policies without input or input from people closest to the work, right? And in this case, that's students. Students are the closest to the work that we have, and we really do need to elevate their voice within the classroom. And so in this case, I mean, understanding their perspectives, believing them when they tell you something, right? Sometimes students are kind of given that like, well, you're a kid and you don't understand.
Right. Yeah.
And they do, right? Like they really understand. And then co-creating ideas with them. This also means taking a chance on the ideas and helping them find their spark. We do a lot of work with the Search Institute, who defines spark as like the interests and passions young people have within them that light a fire in their lives and express the essence of who they are and what they offer to the world. And I love that idea. And I love this idea of a spark that motivates kids to want to come to school, right? It's what allows them to take those risks, make new friends, try something new in the classroom, try something new outside of the classroom. And one of the things that the Search Institute, brings about are these questions that you can ask students. And I really love them. There are, what are your spark? When and where do you express it? Who knows your spark? Who nourishes your spark? What gets in your way? And how can I help you find and keep your spark? And this is something that I really lived by in my classroom, was helping kids figure out what is it that I'm passionate about and what can I do to make a difference. And I think that allowed them to really feel like their voice was being heard and that they could really do something with that, even at a young age.
And I love that that's not just one question, right? Or there's a whole process that needs to happen, right? In order to get to a place where a student may, one person may say all the things at once, but maybe someone else needs a little scaffolding and support, right? To get to a place where they could really, embrace and share, right? What that thing is, even if it's, so internal, now they can share it more widely. And, you mentioned some, project example of telling family stories and special moments. What types of multimedia projects have you seen students most excited about? We know they consume lots of different content, right? But as creators, is it podcasts, videos, digital portfolios, something else that maybe isn't on that list?
Yeah, so what I think is really interesting, I think more than just the platform, it's what students are doing with that, right? And the authentic audience that they can reach. For example, in one of the projects that we had students do was creating PSAs and documentaries about a human violation rights that they saw happening in the world. Right. So then they would go out and they would pick something and they would research and they'd interview people and they'd connect with nonprofits that were working on this issue. And then they'd create a campaign, and it put in a lot of those different things, right? It took in videos. Some of them were doing podcasts, some of them were doing interviews. And they were able to put this all together to really highlight what was happening and what steps could be done and what were already being done to help solve that problem. We shared those videos with their class. We put them on a website. Some years we actually brought them to a local movie theater, right? And shared some of those like as a red carpet event. And I think what students really saw in that, regardless of what platform they were using, is that they were really using their voice to be able to make a difference. They were able to highlight something they cared about. They could share ideas on how it could be solved. And then sometimes it really helps students really think about their future careers, right? Places to volunteer, things that they wanted to take action on. I had one student when I was getting ready to write my book and asking, like, what do you remember? And she shared, like, this made me really think about, she did her project on child abuse. This made me really think about my future career and what I wanted to go into and how I wanted to be able to help students or other children who were dealing with that same issue. And I think that for me was such a moment of clarity of like how important it is to give students that opportunity to be able to think about something that they really care about and be able to do something with it that's going to be heard.
And that with that example too, it just makes me think so much of, when you're working, when you look back at your own probably career, someone who's listening, like you look back and some of those points on the timeline make sense now that you know where you've landed. But in the moment, you don't always know, right? That's going to influence what you're doing later on. So even for a student who might not say, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to be, right? All of these are really informing their future decisions, areas that they might double down or spend more time in. And so I think that's such a great reminder for someone who may be starting off here, right? That great story you just shared, that like looking back, that student could say, right, of course I did that project or I chose that lane because it's something that you can see now I'm so passionate about. So, for someone who's brand new, maybe to using the technology component of this, right, using multimedia tools, where would you recommend they start? Do you have any favorite tools you would recommend for someone diving into this for the first time?
Yes, I want to go back for just a second and say, I think on that note, in my classroom, I had the phrase, find your passion and act on it, hanging in my classroom. It hung above my board, right? And students really were able to like take that and run with it. And I think that is how I also bring in this whole idea of like multimedia tools where, we had some lucky things in our school. We had a green screen recording area in our school, which was amazing. So students could get experience with that. We used some of the basics like WeVideo, we used iMovie, things that were like readily available.
Yeah.
But I think really thinking about the students and what they could bring in was also something I did a lot because sometimes they knew more than I did.
Yeah.
Right. And so asking students, hey, what are some of the ways that you're making videos with your friends?
Yeah.
We know they're doing it, right? And so, I mean, my son is a 16-year-old boy, right? Like he is making things all the time and asking him and saying, hey, what are you using right now? What is and I think for me, I knew what I knew. The tech coach knew what she knew. And then you had all these students who had all this brilliance. And I think this is where, again, student voice can really shine and say, we're creating these, big projects to share about something you care about. How would you do that for your friends? Here's how I would do it for my group of people, right? All the people I know. How would you do it? And get them excited about how they would personally share and then figure out what is possible at your school, right? Like lots of things can be blocked,
Yeah.
right? To be able to use at a school level. but like, are there other tools that you can use? And who else can you bring in? And what other brilliance can you bring in from your students in that regard?
I think that's such great advice for someone who might feel rightfully intimidated about introducing a new tool or wondering what's going to resonate with a group. Do you have, advice for someone who maybe is thinking about the publishing side of this? Like, what should they consider? What advice would you give to educators around that technical side of publishing or sharing student work?
Yeah, I think this is really important, right? I think really understanding who is the audience you're trying to reach is the first question you have to be able to answer for yourself. So for me, going back to the family history project, right, I didn't need the entire world necessarily to hear those stories, but it was important for our school community to hear those stories. So there was a different level of permission that I needed in order to put those on an internal site. So that other people could watch them, right? Other teachers could watch them, other students in the building could watch them. That was a very different site than when we were doing the documentaries and PSAs, which we did want to go to a larger group, right? And so I think it's really understanding who you're trying to reach, what your goal is, and then really working with administration to figure out what are your school district's policies around, do you need to get permission from every parent to do that? Right? Do you need to not show faces if they're making some sort of, right? Like, what are the policies? I also sit on the school board in my local community. So I think thinking about, are there things that you want to bring to a school board? Right? To be able to have those conversations and say, like, we want to share this information. The policy says this. Like, are there shifts you need to make that are more systemic than just the permission slip that goes home to parents? So I think all of those are important pieces to think about.
And important layers, I think, for someone who, we often talk about starting with an audience when we have a creative project for students, or introducing first, like, who's going to see this? Who's going to celebrate this? And doing that, presents a purpose for students, of course, too, but it's also a reminder that there may be some logistic things we need that time to work out. And so waiting till the very end, right, of the unit might not be the best time for anyone, right, who's got a long to-do list. So your new book focuses on middle schoolers, right, as a kind of a target, right, or a focus area. How do you see these strategies scaling to a high school environment or to an elementary, level? Are there some parallels or some unique pieces you want to make sure listeners know about?
I think storytelling in particular can and should happen at any age, right? That isn't something that is just a middle school thing. Everybody is thinking about it. And so I think using your voice and influence to an authentic audience can also be done at all ages. Right? That could be for a younger student, maybe they're sharing something that they think needs to be changed at the school level, right? And that video or something that they're making is going to the principal, right? And that's who your audience is, and that's what you're sharing. And then you can build on that, in middle school where it's more of a community-based thing, or you're thinking about the world, or you're thinking about these bigger problems. And then at a high school level, like, that can continue, right? And that you can take the smaller themes that you were thinking about in middle school, and now you've learned more and you can grow that. And so I think it's really learning about, what is the story I want to tell for myself? And as a young kid, right, that could be about a specific incident that happened. And then it's about who you are, your family, and you're thinking about your identity and, like, what's important to you and who your friends are and all of that in middle school. And then it's in high school, you're starting to think about, all right, what am I doing next? Right? Like, I have a senior right now. It's her last day of school, actually, today. And she is thinking about the what's next, right? And she's so excited. And it's, but that story has followed her from the time she was little, right? All the way up to now, this senior year moment where she's getting ready to go out into the world. So I think, yes, there's some specifics to middle school, of what they're thinking about and maybe the level that they can do it at. But I think you can scale that up and take it to even a bigger level in high school. And I think the same thing can be true for elementary.
Yeah, gosh, and just entering a new chapter, right? As we talk about the storytelling piece for sure. So if a listener, a teacher listening today wants to elevate student voices, knows there's a lot of directions they could go in, maybe feeling a little overwhelmed at a big new project, what's one small first step that they could take, within the week, within the month to get something started in their classrooms?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is to gather feedback from your students. Ask them something, right? Look at the data you have all around you. We collect data every single moment of the day as an educator. Every single second you're taking in something. And so take 2 things that you really want to celebrate from your classroom and share that with your students. I've noticed this thing about our class, right? These are things I want to celebrate. And then one thing that you want input in. I don't feel like that lesson landed for you yesterday. Right? Why is that?
Right.
What is it that you're thinking about? And then figure out what their insights are, right? Or I'm getting ready to start this new project. This is something that I'm really excited about. What do you think? What would make you even more excited about this thing? Right? I think that is one really small step to take. In my book, I highlight this idea of spark, right? That's the kind of end of the thing. And the spark is to study. What information are you collecting from students or with students? The P is pilot. What can you try in your classroom based on that information? So you've gathered this. What are you going to pilot? Then you analyze. What patterns did you see? How did kids react to this? What happened? Then you reflect. What changes can you make? What should you continue to do? And finally, that K is for Kindle. How do you keep that spark going for you and for your students? Both groups are really important, right? We get burnt out. We're in May right now, but we're recording this, right? It's coming out in July. As you start to think about your next year, how do you take what you learned and loved and kindle that excitement for you for next year and for your students?
I love that reminder. And what a great, framework for having this conversation with colleagues too, if you're planning for this upcoming school year, reflecting on the past school year. And so I, of course, I'm going to link out to the book so everyone can find it. But for someone who's on the move, maybe needs that mental reminder to go take a look, where can people connect with you, Jennifer? Where can they learn more about your work?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn and Blue Sky if you want to connect with me there. And then to your point, the book is on ASCD website along with Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for these great ideas, the framework, just the way to think about student voice that hopefully folks can take into this new school year.
Thank you so much, Monica. It's been a wonderful conversation.
It was lots of fun chatting with Jennifer today, and her new book came out this summer, so you'll definitely want to make sure to get your hands on a copy. I'm going to add it to the Amazon collection that I have, full of books from authors that have joined me for episodes of the Easy EdTech podcast. So make sure to grab your copy if you want to learn a little bit more. Let's make this EdTech easy with a few key points from today's episode. Storytelling builds student identity and connection. Authentic audiences deepen engagement. Voice and choice empower multimedia creativity. Finding a student's spark fosters motivation. Remember, you can find the show notes and full list of resources from today's episode, including all of the ways to connect with Jennifer Ciok, by heading over to easyedtechpodcast.com and finding today's episode, number 328. This episode is sponsored by my Easy EdTech Club, a membership designed to help K-12 educators save time and simplify technology integration. When you join, you'll get instant access to dozens of months' worth of content from the past couple of years, plus new masterclasses, guides, and resources each month. It's all self-paced, so you can dive in whenever it works for your schedule. Head to easyedtechclub.com to learn more and sign up. That's easyedtechclub.com for all the details. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.